This is Basket Case Clubs, CBR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. My name is Michael Connolly and it is my pleasure to take you on this journey of basket casey goodness. Joining me as he did last time and probably will again next time is my brother and partner in basket casey goodness, Steve. G'day, Steve.
Yay! Basket Casey goodness. More Basket Casey goodness. Virtual Basket Casey goodness.
Yeah, I just had some basket casey goodness for afternoon tea. It was yummy.
Wait, wasn't that a Danish?
Yeah, but it came in a basket.
Hey!
Hey!
We're going to take over the world.
Yes. Do you know why they're
One
called
basket
Danish?
at a time.
Do you know why they're called Danishes?
I reckon there's a really good chance you're about to give me either A, a real true explanation, or B, a complete load of shit.
I was wondering if you knew because I don't know.
There we go. It was B. I reckon there's a chance that they might be Danish.
They're probably, and we've probably got some listeners going, "Come on, boys! Like, how hard can it be? Know your pastries. Yeah, Google your pastries."
I wonder if there was to be a pastry known as an Australian.
It's called a pie, dude.
Or a sausage roll.
Or a pasty. Oh,
no, that's Cornish. That's English.
Oh, it is too. It is too. And I think pies are as well. Certainly pork pies are. And like, how gross are they if you have them cold? Like, seriously, got to be hot and like burn your tongue hot with the meat in the middle and smothered in tomato sauce. Well, they don't have to be, but that's how I prefer them. There, look, our listeners are learning a lot about us, Stephen. Nothing about basket case clubs yet. So why don't we actually take a little segue? Have you got a segue idea? Do you?
No, I was just going to confirm that this pastry type is named Danish because it originates from Denmark. There you go. We can put that to bed now. Let's move on to talk about what we should be talking about.
Thank you so much for helping me with that. I will be able to sleep tonight knowing that a Danish is called a Danish because it's Danish.
You probably have bad dreams, though, because of the late hour of the day when you're eating sugary Danishes.
It was half a Danish. It was half a Danish. I had paced myself across the day to only have half a Danish.
You pastried yourself?
Yes. So if I wasn't present in the bakery, but I still wanted somebody to get a Danish from the bakery for me, how might I do that, Steve?
Great segue. You could send
I've been working on it for months, dude.
You could send a proxy.
I could send a proxy. I wonder if my proxy, and would it have to be somebody from Denmark?
Well, I was going to say, is this the reason that you only got half a Danish? Because you set someone else as your proxy and they ate half your freaking Danish.
Oh, look, they just took their commission, the Danish commission off the top.
I would.
Yeah. So look, this is something that has come up a little bit recently. No, it has come up a lot recently and it has come up a lot all the time. Should a constitution include proxies or should it not include proxies? And we're going to probably just throw this around a little bit this evening because it's we'll get into it, but there are so many fights that we've been involved in. And the story that I have to begin with is the story recently. It wasn't you and it wasn't me. It was Matt who shared with me that there's a club where there's a movement within the club that to remove the ability for people to attend and vote at a meeting by using proxies. And they had a special general meeting to change just that part of the constitution to say, we want to get rid of proxies. We don't want proxies. Now, I wasn't there. I would have loved more to have been a fly on the wall than a facilitator at this meeting, just to listen to what happened. But apparently poor Matt's kind of sitting there having to bite his tongue going, what? When, and this is the funny bit, the no camp, as in the camp that says we want to get rid of proxies, had turned up with a whole heap of proxy votes to get the vote across the line.
So they got their way because of proxies. Define irony. Yes.
Yeah. I found that quite funny, and it was just anyway. So let's dig into it. What is a proxy, Steve? Why don't you explain a proxy to us?
Well, a proxy is when you're hungry and you desire a Danish, yet you can't make it to the pastry house, the wee bakery. Okay, so if you can't make it to a meeting, a proxy appointment enables you to send someone else on your behalf so that you still get a chance to have your say. And there are arguments mounted both for and against this mechanism that we'll undoubtedly talk through now. But I find it interesting that it is often a really kind of polarizing topic. It's something that, as you just outlined then from that example from Matt, can give rise to real hot debate, and people feel quite strongly because often they have been involved in a situation like that where they feel as though maybe a meeting was stacked, and often those people who vote against the retention or addition of proxies into a constitution will have felt that they lost their, they were on the losing side from some meeting because of the use of proxies. And they exist as a mechanism for people with a genuine reason to not be able to make it to a general meeting. And this is really important for us to clarify at the outset, that proxies can only be used typically at general meetings, not at a management committee or a board meeting, because individuals are elected to the management committee or board, and it's those people who are accountable for that, for the decisions made by that board or management committee. So it's very uncommon that we'll see a provision that someone can send a proxy on their behalf to vote in that forum, but it's at general meetings like the AGM where we'll typically see the mechanism, which is proxies and the ability for someone to send someone else to vote on their behalf.
So from my perspective, this is the thing that kind of bugs me about it, is that if you've got proxies, you've got proxies. And if you don't got proxies, you don't got proxies. And while that sounds simple, let's break it down. If you've got proxies and there is a camp within a club that wants to vote yes to a motion and a camp that wants to vote no, then they're both on the same playing field because there's proxies. They can both go and get proxies. If you don't have proxies, neither side can get proxies. So you're still on an even playing field. So I often wonder if it's this feeling of inequity or unbalance between the two sides, yet is it more just politicking, and is it even apathy/laziness that says, well, we don't actually want to do the work to go and get proxies, and we don't want those people who are a bit more gung-ho than us to be able to go and get proxies because they're, the go-get-'em types. So we want to bring them back to, I don't know, is it?
What's interesting, so as you know, I ran a session just last night, and we're regularly running sessions, education sessions around constitutions. Not only our work directly with clubs that we're assisting to write a new constitution, but also delivering, a session to a group of people during which we're talking generally about constitutions, the sections of the document, key considerations in preparing a compliant, best practice, contemporary constitution. And just last night, the discussion about proxies was quite involved, shall I say.
So where did it go?
Well, there were various people in the room who had lived through shitty experiences from proxies in their opinion, and this meeting stacking, decisions falling a certain way. One other consideration that was raised last night is, do proxies count towards our quorum? And if the answer is yes, then theoretically one person could turn up holding a fistful of proxies and achieve quorum and make all the decisions at a general meeting on their own. That doesn't make a whole heap of sense, and it certainly, in my opinion, doesn't pass the pub test.
The sniff test. Yeah, it
The
smells
sniff
funny.
test. A bit like the bar mat in a pub after a big Friday night. Anyway, yeah, sniff test, pub test. So
suffice it to say, don't go sniffing the bar mat.
don't go sniffing the bar mat at any time.
Yeah.
So so one lady during the session then asked if proxies are allowed and someone turns up and they present to the secretary a questionable proxy appointment, so an instrument, a document, a piece of paper that suggests that the person who's handed the piece of paper over has been appointed as someone else's proxy who's not able to make it, and there's a question about whether that's a legitimate appointment. What can they do? And one of the logistical challenges of proxies, as they're often written into constitutions, is that the provision says you've just got to get your proxy, the form appointing your proxy to the secretary before the general meeting starts. That can happen just minutes before the meeting starts, which of course logistically removes the opportunity for the secretary or anyone else to confirm the bona fides of that appointment, and to actually confirm for themselves that it is a legit proxy appointment. So that's one of the arguments that is mounted against proxies, is that people, and this is, I think, what I was going to say just to the comment that you made earlier about the equitable opportunity that people who want to vote for and the people who want to vote against any particular proposed motion have through the mechanism which is proxies. I think one of the arguments that I often hear against proxies is that they can be used in an unscrupulous way. So people can go and gather a fistful, like I say, of proxies from people by asking, hey, Michael, are you going to attend the AGM? Can you make it? Or do you want, I can just take your proxy if you want. And I can go and do that in some cases, an infinite number of times up to the number of members.
Let me push you on that then.
Yep.
Why is that unscrupulous?
What's unscrupulous is that in some cases, the argument has been mounted that those discussions aren't actually happening and someone's just scribbling someone else's name on their proxy appointment and saying, yes, Michael did appoint me as his proxy. Here's the form evidencing that, where you actually haven't done so. So I reckon
that's a systems failing, because a proxy form should be signed.
Absolutely. Oh, and I have heard plenty of allegations that people have forged others' signatures on proxy forms to get the appointment appearing legitimate.
So somebody who's going to do that is a fraudster regardless, and some might say a dickhead and a liar.
We certainly would.
No, I said some might, Steve. That exists in life outside of the realm of proxies.
Of course it does.
So I don't think that politicking is unscrupulous. I think that's just a part of it. And this is really what we're talking about.
And you're exactly right that both sides of any debate have equal opportunity to go and gather proxies if the Constitution allows for it.
So I've been stewing on that a little bit, because I reckon it is then apathy. I don't want to have to go and do the work. So I don't want, if you are prepared to do the work, I don't want you to have an unfair advantage. Oh, how's that unfair? I did the work.
Yep. Look, so it's just quickly to then elaborate on what I think underpins some people's fear of proxies. There are essentially two types of proxy: discretionary and non-discretionary. Discretionary proxy means I'm going to send Michael to the AGM to vote on my behalf, and he can exercise his discretion, i.e., I'm not going to tell him how to vote. Non-discretionary proxy means I'm going to send Michael as my proxy to vote at the AGM, and I want him to vote for this person and this person and this person, and for this motion and against that motion. So I think that also what, like I say, underpins some of the fear of proxies is that I might get you to appoint me as, a proxy through a discretionary appointment where I can just exercise my discretion and vote whoever I want. You might tell me, hey, I want you to vote for this person, against this person, and so on, informally, and I might not listen to you. I might just turn up and exercise your vote and the votes of all the other people from whom I've gathered proxies to get my desired outcome.
So whose fault is that then? If I've given you the
wrong... dickhead. Yeah, sure. No, you're right.
I've given you the wrong form.
Yeah,
because there's two types, and I need to have made that clear. So yeah, and then are you?
And you've placed your trust in an unscrupulous dickhead, whereas you should have used the non-discretionary form, arguably.
So I should have been a bit more discretionary in my distribution of scruples. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah, is that another type of pastry? Yes.
Yeah.
So look, but I think that there's actually a lot of logic in what you're saying, that I think that some people don't want proxies because they don't want to have that. If they want to get their way, they don't want to have to do that hard work to gather the proxies to get the numbers in the room.
To get more people. Yeah. I, and look, full disclosure, I haven't given that a lot of airtime in. I haven't spoken about it previously. I'm only really thinking about that as I'm talking, which is the benefit of this little exercise that we do that is basket case clubs, isn't it, Steve?
It's one of the many benefits. That's right. Yeah. I think there's an interesting point here that you and I don't think we see eye to eye on, and that is the limitation of proxies. So this
Well,
is
before you
is this
go,
where you were going to go? Yeah.
no, I was actually going to go right to the end of the episode and do a spoiler. The spoiler here is that uh, 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 there's no one right answer. We're not going to agree on whether proxies are good or proxies are bad, because I don't agree in my own mind whether proxies are good or proxies are bad, because it actually takes into consideration whether it's good or bad, needs to take into consideration a whole heap of other factors. So where you're going to start to now go is, I think, to some of the limitations of proxies, and those limitations exist largely around how things like an election process takes place. Because if you've got other mechanisms for elections, rather than you must be in the room at the AGM to cast your vote when the election is called, when the returning officer declares all positions vacant and calls the election open and then closes, but that's not the only way to do it. So there are limitations, and there are also even the fact that you mentioned discretionary versus this is how I want you to vote. There are so many things that then get stuck. And we are, being Connolly's, we're prone to overthink shit. So we're gonna. Yeah, I've even got a coaster on my kitchen table that says, "Hang on, let me overthink this." That's what's on the coaster. We're gonna overthink it. We're gonna over worry and give weighted precedence to shit that's never going to eventuate, because people, in a lot of cases, just don't care enough. It's just
lazy.
Can we go now? I got a barbecue
Yeah.
with friends this afternoon.
Yeah, and that's all well and good until the proverbial really hits the fan, isn't it? Like that
Yeah,
apathy, which
yeah,
exists in clubs typically, will often just disappear when there's some contentious issue. And we know that because we have helped to run plenty of difficult general meetings where there's some contentious issue. Someone's been kicked out and they're appealing the decision, or there is a vote to remove management committee members from office, that sort of thing, that will often then bring, or, a vote to change the provisions relating to proxies in your constitution, that'll bring the people out who might go gathering proxies. But
and a ship needs to be built to withstand the worst of sea conditions, not the best. So for the most part, we've got calm waters, smooth sailing for clubs. But what you're saying is there are times when the bush lawyer that we've talked about way back in episode somewhere in single digits jumps out of the woodwork, and then Grumpy George comes and slaps the Constitution on the table and says, "Splat! There you go. You guys are wrong. You're acting outside the Constitution. It's the vibe of the thing." So when we go through this process, this is one of those things in a constitution that needs careful consideration, because we're going to be able to bring that perspective, as we're sharing now. We have to bring the perspective of how to think of it from multiple angles, not just, I had a bad experience once, therefore they're out. Okay, what was that experience? What led to it? Was it somebody being unscrupulous? Were you being lazy? Was somebody else being lazy? What was the vote? Where did it fall down? And the stuff that we're probably going to talk about now are probably more complicated things than happened in those cases. It was probably simply I wasn't aware that I was allowed to get proxy. Somebody turned up with 36 of us, and 36 of them, and rolled us, and we weren't ready for it.
I think that's a very fair point as well, that it's often the unexpected use of proxies that brings people unstuck and gets them pissed off.
Yeah.
So let's maybe talk through a couple of the ways that proxies can be managed, and you can lend your opinion on that, because I think that might be where we differ a little bit.
Okay.
And I think that's just been somewhat foreshadowed by your comment that proxies are either in or they're out, and whether they're in or out, people on either side of any debate have a chance to use them. So I'll come back to that. But I think just before we do that, it's important to note that, in our opinion, proxies can be in or out. This is one of those interesting discussions where we'll add some considerations into the mix for a club to consider when we're helping them write a new constitution in relation to proxies, but we don't really feel strongly on this stuff. And I
This is
think
your
that
decision.
this is your decision. And
Yep.
again, as long as
We just take the blinkers off.
we just take the blinkers off, and as long as if they're in, the provisions for how they are used are very clear. So first and foremost, I think that there should be, in recognition of the time that a secretary or whoever else might be in charge of preparing for a general meeting, in recognition of the time that they spend, I think that it's logical for proxies to be due sooner than just simply before the meeting. So whether that's 24 hours, 48 hours, a number of business days, some reasonable period of time that enables the secretary, let's say, to prepare for the meeting and to determine, along with the rest of the members of the management committee or administrative team of that club, how proxies are going to be managed during the meeting.
Okay, I'm gonna 100% agree with you on that one, because there's so much that hangs on that. Even if it's 24 hours, at least I know who am so in an association context, who are my voting delegates? I know that for sure, and therefore I know it, depending on how the vote's going to run, whether I'm running it electronically, who are the people I need to program into the system. If I'm running a ballot, how many ballots do I need to give out, and to whom do I need to give multiple ballot papers? So absolutely agree, and that's just, if nothing else, it makes good sense, but it's also just common courtesy for the poor bloody secretaries who have to manage this stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree, and yeah, I think that's probably the most important point, is give the, don't, and this is what really shits me, is when people use a bit of, constitution stagecraft, for want of a better term, to get their desired outcome from a general meeting. And they, like you say, Grumpy George slapping the constitution down and scaring the heck out of people on the management committee into, running the meeting in the way that Grumpy George wants them to run it. So the next consideration then is placing a limit on the number of proxies that any individual can hold. So to help manage this fear of stacking the meeting, where someone can turn up with, 30, 50, 100 proxies, and therefore pretty easily hold the balance of power at a general meeting, some clubs opt to limit the number of proxies that any one person can hold. For instance, if you're coming along and you're voting on someone else's behalf as well, you can't hold any more than one proxy or 5 proxies. What that number is very much dependent on the club and the experiences of the people who are involved in the process of writing the new constitution. But I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because I think that this is where you and I might differ in our opinions a little bit.
You tell me first.
I think it's okay. I think it's okay. I think if
okay or preferable.
Good question. I'm probably going to plead apathy here and say I don't give a shit. I don't really mind, because, and I think that without having codified it in my own mind clearly to this point, the way that you explained it earlier really clarifies that. Whether they're in, they're out, they're limited, they're not limited, everyone's on the same playing field to get their desired outcome. Yeah.
Okay. That's pretty much my take on it as well. I don't.
Okay. I think it's logical.
Yeah. Look, so long as, if it's not limited, I think that's more of an argument to have them need to be delivered earlier. So say 24 hours before the opening of the meeting, or even more, maybe a couple of days. But regardless, you know this, Steve, you went to university, you went to school, you know that whenever the deadline is, that's when you're going to finish whatever it is you're working on. So it's the people who complain about deadlines like that, deadlines for nomination, for consideration for the elections in the first place, the people who complain are the people who didn't get their shit together for the 2 weeks or 4 weeks that nominations were open in the first place, and then cracked the shits because it closed at 11:59 on Thursday night. Well, it was always going to close at 11:59. But I never saw the notification. Okay, so you obviously did, because now you're complaining, and you saw it eventually, and it's all in the Constitution. So so
literally in black and white.
Take some ownership for your own problems. This is the second time today I've been on a bit of a rant.
Only the second. Holy moly! This is like the first time ever that we haven't hit double digits,
No,
folks.
now that you say that, there were more rants today. But the other one, just to get something on your radar for next time, was about accessible facilities, and some dickhead who started ranting. Remember, we had this in a meeting a couple of weeks ago. Some dickhead who started ranting on about, oh well, we don't need accessible facilities. People in wheelchairs don't play here. We don't need
And we're
accessibility to our
full.
fields. And yeah, and we're full anyway. And yeah, we don't need women's change rooms because there aren't that many of them. We can't take any more members anyway, whether they're blokes or chicks. And I just thought, we try very hard to avoid an explicit rating on basket case clubs, so I will just bite my tongue. And I didn't use those words on LinkedIn on my rant, but I did say it. I did say it really pisses me off in all capitals. So I yelled it at the LinkedIn world. Anyway, back to proxies, because it doesn't really piss me off as much as misogynistic, and it's usually middle-aged to older white guys, not necessarily of privilege, not necessarily overweight. It's just these guys who
Male, pale, and stubborn.
yep, and completely blind to this stuff.
Yep.
Anyway, sorry about the diversion. No, I'm not sorry about the diversion.
No. I think by now that our listeners know that each episode is going to be pretty much one big diversion. Okay, so now before we wrap up, which I think we should do shortly because we've just about done proxies to death,
I was thinking around about halfway through.
there is at least.
All our listeners, you can see how long the episode's got to go, so you'll know whether we're wrapping up or not.
Really close.
So to bring this to a close, he says, when the little slider's only at halfway across the
For
freaking
the first time of 8, yes.
Yeah.
One other really important consideration that we're sure to throw into the mix if it doesn't get raised when we're working with a group of people to write a new constitution for their club is the growth in use, accessibility, and affordability of online meeting tools. So you pointed to it earlier when you identified that some organisations will provide in their constitutions that people can vote virtually. They don't need to be in the room in many cases to cast their vote. In some cases, they can cast their vote before the meeting even starts. In other cases, they've got to be online and engaging in the meeting and being able to, hear and take part in the meeting's proceedings as they take place. And they can cast their vote virtually. And there's a whole host of tools that make that really easy. But this is quite an important consideration because this growth in the accessibility of these meeting tools, which mean that someone who has a legitimate reason to not be able to attend a meeting because they're even in another time zone or,
in Dubai. Well, which is in another time zone.
There you go.
And another zone.
Can still join virtually. So in many cases, we have clubs that say, we don't need proxies anymore because, when we first became incorporated or we first set up our club and we wrote our first constitution, we needed proxies so that people who had a legit reason to not be here still had an opportunity to have their say. Now they can just join virtually, so they don't need proxies. Now, we acknowledge that the management of meetings where some people are in the room and some people are joining virtually can be tricky, and you've got to have the right tech. IT set up. You've got to have the right tech to make it
AV,
seamless.
Yep.
However, it is an important consideration to throw into the mix when we're talking about the need for proxies.
Yeah, definitely. So do proxies contribute to quorum?
Depends on the constitution.
Right. But if there's nothing in there, well, usually there's something in there. Well, there should be something in there.
Yeah, what does Nick Renton say?
Default position is yes.
That they do count.
They do contribute to quorum.
Unless it's expressly stated otherwise.
Yeah. So look, we're digging into some pretty complex parts of constitutions here. And so the mechanisms for, and even what you're talking about, do you open and close the voting before the meeting? Do you open the voting before the meeting and close it during the, all of these things take some pretty sophisticated mechanics within the constitution, but anything's possible. So the call to action is, if you've got a problem and you want to have an eye across it, this is one of the things we do quite regularly, is we do constitution reviews. I don't know if I've said it on the podcast previously, Steve, but remember in The Matrix, how Tank and Dozer can sit in the Nebuchadnezzar and just watch the green things fall down the screen like this. And they go, oh no, Neo's in trouble. Like that was probably a terrible Tank or Dozer accent, but they can see what's going on. Like I can read constitutions and say to people, so with this clause here, who are you trying to kick out? And they laugh and say, oh, is it that obvious? Is it? I say, yeah. So who was it? No, yeah, that was Grumpy George. Like,
Yeah.
so so look, I think that there's a couple of other constraints to proxies that I want to get on the table as well. One of them is that if you don't have discretionary proxies, if you're carrying proxies that say I want you to vote a particular way or for a particular candidate, both of those can cause problems and even deny me my right as a member to cast a vote, a fully informed vote. So if you are carrying proxies that are non-discretionary, it basically means that there can be no amendments to motions, because if the motion is amended, then I might have thought differently about it. Now, recognizing that there's some ambiguity in some people's minds about what an amendment is and what constitutes a new motion, because the substantive motion is not actually the same because the amendment has changed it beyond what is reasonable. But that's definitely a constraint of having proxies. So you can't do that. And not enough people, this is one of those things that never happens until it happens. Not enough people would understand that that could be a massive constraint here. And this is interesting because we were talking about this with the club only last week. But the other one that is very similar is when you've got somebody who's standing for the position of president, but where it's a popular election for all positions, and there are multiple positions open, and because there's no limitation to how many positions I can nominate myself, I've nominated for president, I've nominated for secretary, I've nominated for treasurer, and I've nominated for committee members. If I don't get president, then I'm still in the running for the others to make sure I give myself a good chance to get onto the committee or the board. But if I am elected as president, then I'm no longer a candidate in those other positions. And so my candidacy should be withdrawn, but some people might have voted for me with non-discretionary proxies. So again, it limits the choice of voting system that you can use. Having proxies in that case limits the choice of voting systems that you can use. Obviously, that opens the other can of worms, and this is why proxies cannot be considered on their own. They need to be taken in context, as I'm pretty sure I said something about that earlier. These are all of those other things that you've got to consider, because you might then choose the method of voting, or even whether our president slash chairperson is popularly elected by members, or as is the case from Sport Australia's governance principles, members elect the board then choose their chair from among themselves. And because that then reiterates that the president or the chair is the boss of the meetings, not the boss of the club, or in that case, the association. So yeah, like I said, spoiler, there's not one. So I started taking the piss out of people who say they don't want them, and now taking the piss out of having them. Hence why I don't have a strong position on whether they should be in or whether they should be out, because either way, as we started, it's a level playing field. So it's going to work. And you just make it work. But if you're going to get rid of them, don't do it because you're a lazy prick.
Hey, I'm really interested just to ask you one question, which is, what do you deem sufficient amendment to a motion which would disqualify a non-discretionary proxy holder from participating in that vote?
Oh, how long's a piece of string? Because it depends on the motion. So to give you a very simple example that I know I use all the time, and I think you use all the time, we need to buy a new barbecue. The motion that was put forward says we're going to buy a new barbecue and we're going to get it from Bunnings. There you go, Bunnings. You need to give us some sponsorship dough now. Oh, and whoever's
This episode brought to you by our friends at Bunnings.
Make sure you put your onions on the bottom. Let's just say that we've got the motion that says we're going to buy a new barbecue. It's going to come from Bunnings because I found one there for $700 and it'll fit the bill. That motion, the substantive motion there is we're going to buy a barbecue. We're going to invest some money in buying a barbecue. And a reasonable amendment to that motion would be, well, let's not mention the supplier, because Barbecues Galore may actually have a better quality one for cheaper. We might be able to get one from Amazon and get it delivered for free, for cheaper, or for the same price. So let's not lock ourselves in with the motion. Let's take the supplier out of it. We might need to spend a little bit more or a little bit less. So let's change the money from $700 just because that happens to be the one that Carolyn found when she was shopping for a barbecue, and found the one that she figured was best at Bunnings, because maybe it was the same as the one that they'd had. and say, and maybe instead let's give ourselves an upper limit. So whoever's actually doing the purchasing has an upper limit and has the ability to compare not just apples for apples on price, but also I'm rambling here, Steve, but all of this stuff is reasonable as an amendment. The substantive motion remains the same. Are we going to buy a barbecue or are we not going to buy a barbecue?
So if I sent you as my proxy and said, I want you to vote for that motion to buy a new barbecue, full disclosure here, this is not a decision that should be made at a general meeting.
Yes.
This is a decision that would be made at a committee meeting.
Yep.
But for argument's sake, would you suggest that the substance of the motion is still
Intact.
so consistent that you could still exercise?
Yeah, I believe so.
My vote. Okay.
I believe so. That's my feeling in that case. If we decide, well, hang on a minute, if we put in a smokehouse instead of a barbecue, we'll make more money because the low and slow guys who we have here as a food truck every now and again make a shit ton more money than we do. So we should do that. Now we're changing the substance of the motion because the process for firing up a barbecue is different from the process of firing up a big smokehouse. So now that's different, and therefore we need to consider the impact on volunteers, because I might say, no, that's not actually something that I want because I'm the poor schmuck who has to cook the barbecue and I don't want to have to invest. I've had your slow cooked, smoked pulled pork, and it didn't take you as quick a time as it did to cook the sausage that I bought from Bunnings.
Yep. With the onion on the bottom.
With the onion on the bottom, yes.
Yep, good, that's fine. And one of the reasons that I ask is that I was keen in this forum to bounce that idea off you, because this is something that does often get raised in the arguments for and against the inclusion of proxies in constitutions.
Yep. Well, that was a fun little venture down.
We should do this again.
There's a very good chance that we will. But there's a very good chance we'll also talk about proxies again, and we might. Sorry, we should have one of those little things. Michael and Steve Connolly reserve the right to change their mind at any given time, because we could,
and we regularly do.
We regularly do, but we only do because we become exposed to more relevant or more contemporary information, or information that's actually going to help people. That's what we do. We help people. Thank you very much, Steve, for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did.
Indeed, as always. Yes, I did.
Indubitably, and thank you to Jess for making us sound good and look good. If you're not already connected to us on social media, make sure you do so. Sign up for our newsletter because we've got lots of good tidbits in there. Who knows, there might even be an article about proxies at some point. Would not surprise me. And until next time, Steve, thank you again, and I look forward to catching up with you for more Basket Casey goodness sometime very soon.
And I also look forward to catching you up.
See ya. Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.